Hello, everyone. Also from my side, I'm Dana. As Jacob introduced me, it was very nice to do so. I'm a tutor in CareerFoundry, and I'm leading a series of little talks we're doing this summer. The previous one was about missing values and how to handle them, and I'm pretty sure that you can still obtain the link from somewhere with the recording. And in this one, we're going to be talking about outliers in data sets. I think that's actually, I tend to look at this as a nice, very fun and lighthearted topic because it's going to show you lots of different things that you can do in analysis. And also it definitely represents one of the most important steps that we tend to do when we analyze our data. Before we actually start out, are there any major things that you want to ask? Maybe you can keep them for the end of the talk, but if anything is not clear, or if you just want to, I don't know, ask me something just interim while I'm talking, I absolutely don't mind. You can just put it in a chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on this one. So you can definitely interrupt me if something seems unclear while I'm doing the steps I'm doing. So let's start out. Okay, there is a question, sorry, about difference between data analytics and big data analytics. Yeah, I saw this one. That's not really within the scope of this talk. I would say that the main difference is a technological one. I mean, big data apparently regards like massive arrays of data, so this requires different tools. So I'll just state this, but at the end of the talk, I could actually post some links, maybe with some useful information. But the topic of this talk right now is outliers. So let's get to this one. In terms of agenda, how exactly we're going to structure this? We're going to intertwine some theory while we're seeing some examples at the same time, because I think that works best. And I don't really like showing some theoretical content and just talking through. So we're going to start out with looking at Excel and a small data set that I sourced from Kaggle, especially for the purposes of this talk. If you can't see, please let me know. I've shared my screen and I think it should be fine. I'm also keeping an eye at the chat right now. So do let me know if you can't see well and I can zoom in. Okay, everything seems good. Right. So outliers. What are outliers? You know, this is something that I think it seems sometimes a little bit more daunting than it should be. But essentially, an outlier is just an unusual value. Or some kind of an extreme value, which is also an unusual value. You know, I think actually sometimes it's better to even call it unusual values other than outliers, because it's just a much more intuitive term for what exactly we want to be dealing with. And it also has a lot to do with what we are meant to be expecting of a data set. So without further ado, let's just look at a very simple example of what exactly an outlier could look like. So that's my Excel tab. This is just a completely made up data. I just did it for the sake of the example. First column, we have index. So this is just the number of the rows. And then we have the variable age. So, you know, we have only really 14 rows of this data set, so-called. And looking at the values, we see we got 37, 35, 45, 36, 78, 101, then 32, 29, 41, so on until 42. And then at the very end, we have 99,999. Okay, I'm zooming in. I hope that's good. Right. So, you know, we don't need to know anything special about analytics or about Excel, you know, just to spot immediately that these values here and also these values here are more or less in the same range. Sorry, without the 78. We can see that we've got 29 as I think as the minimum value, and we've got 48 as the maximum value. So we can basically say they're between 29 and 48, and not really anything below that or anything above that. So this is kind of what we would expect from this variable. We can see that most of the values are in a certain range, right? But then we see we've got this 78, we've got this centurion that's 101 years old, and we've got this really weird value that's 99,999. So immediately we can say, okay, this value and this one here, they are definitely unusual for this column. And here it's extremely straightforward, because we have only really 14 rows. You can spot them straight away, and you can say immediately, okay, I really think that these values belong here. Maybe there was some kind of a mistake, or maybe these people weren't meant to be in that study and there was some kind of a data collection error. So this is just to clarify what we mean by an outlier. Now, there are different cases of how to proceed when finding these outliers and what to do with them. But this is going to be more towards the end of the talk. But right now, I want to show you how exactly to detect these outliers, because, in this example, this is actually a very unrepresentative example for the reality and for real life and working in the industry, because you very rarely get a data set that only really consists of just 14 rows. I mean, they're just completely made up just to demonstrate what an outlier is going to look like. Now, before we actually go into discussing different techniques for discovering outliers, you're probably going to ask, why do we even bother with that? I mean, these are just values. Why don't we leave them be? The answer is very simple, without going into too many details about advanced analytics. The problem is that outliers always are going to affect some analytical procedure you're going to be doing. So assuming that, you do something extremely simple like descriptive statistics in your data set, and if you have outliers, they're going to affect each and every measure of tendency or any other property of the data set that you want to be explaining. So let's start with a very, very basic one. This is the mean. And as basic as the mean is, it's extremely important because it actually even plays a role in more advanced analytics, like, for example, regression analysis, which is built pretty much on the mean and the difference of all of the values from the mean. So this is something that we definitely shouldn't underestimate. It's very important to have representative data that we can be sure that whatever insight we're getting from our analytical approaches is actually a valid one, and it's not based on something that's, well, basically not true. Because you can see that in this example, we have our target group. Let's say, I don't know, this could be a control group or an experimental group for some kind of a diet. We can see that the researchers who collected the data were probably just interested in that age bracket. So that's kind of like young people to middle age. So maybe they didn't want to have someone who's 78 years old, because, these people, they have different diseases, way more different physical status. And generally, you're not going to give the same advice to someone who's 101 or 78 as you're going to give to someone who's 36 maybe, right? So the problem is with outliers that they really affect what's going on in a data set in terms of the mean. And as we said, the mean is very important for lots of different procedures. We're not going to really go into all of the approaches where the mean is essential, but let's look at what happens here with that mean. So the mean, as you know, is just simply the sum of all of the values in some column or variable divided by the number of variables. Okay, so wow, you can see that here we have a mean of the entire column. This is 7,185, which is huge. And of course, you can see that, this even goes into thousands because of this value right here, because most of them are just 2 digits. And then we have this one, 99,999. And this is dragging the mean up extremely. And hence, actually, that's making it extremely unrepresentative. So let's try this one more time, just without this one. So I'm going to type the average formula, but we're going to only really stop until here and see how that changes. Okay, now that looks way, way, way more normal. We got 45, but still, is this representative for most of the values in the data set? Let's try one more time and see what the mean is gonna be like without the 78 and 101. And there we go. So we've got a mean age of the target group be 37.5 if we round this up. So I think that really simple made up example should give you a very good hint about why it's always a good idea to clean your outliers, because essentially whatever you do in your analysis project or day-to-day work, whatever you want to do, you're eventually going to have to use the mean for something. For example, in marketing, actually, there is this really, really important measure that basically determines the next marketing campaigns or the success of some marketing campaigns. And this is something called a rolling average. Basically, when you have data for performance, maybe for sales of a certain product that you aired an ad for, and you have sales numbers per each month. And basically what you do is you create like a 3-month rolling average or a 6-month rolling average. And you just plot like a line and you see whether the average is moving with 3 months delay, which is basically the time that you need to see an effect from your ad campaign. And, just to see whether there is some kind of an effect from your campaign. And that's extremely important because, in the industry, for example, especially in marketing and market research, this is what's going to determine your budget for the next year. And also, it's definitely a good idea to know whether your campaign was a success or not. And, this insight is going to have lots of different implications for lots of areas in your entire business. So this is why you definitely want to know whether your mean is correct or not. So in this case, okay, we got the correct mean. So the highlighted numbers are definitely outliers, and we definitely don't want to have them in the data set. So as we said, this is really straightforward because, I can see all the rows. I can just spot them with my bare eye. It's not a bother. And to step this up a little bit more, we're going to use a real data set. So the one that I got from Kaggle. And this data set is called the Forbes America's Top College from 2019. Basically, this is a ranking from all the, I think most of them are Ivy League, but not only, universities in the United States. You can see that the data set actually doesn't really have that many columns, which is good for us. So we're not going to use all of them anyway. But we've got a rank of the university, we've got the name, we've got the city, we've got whether it's a private or a public institution. And then we have lots of numbers, which, by the way, definitely do play a role in decisions for lots of people. So that's actually a very important data set. So we've got an undergraduate population, student population, net price of the programs, got the average grant aid, got a total annual cost. We've got the alumni salary, which is also very important. Acceptance rate, then some SAT scores, and then the website of the university. So we're going to focus only really on a couple of columns in the data set because, data exploration. It's very time consuming, and we have some time frame to fit into. So this is the raw version of the data set that I have here. There is also another one cleaned, which I want to show you how everything changes after we clean the data set. So before we start out with the actual practice, and I show you some different steps, how to detect outliers, they're basically, let's say, two different approaches that I will put them into two rough groups. There are the layman's approaches, where you don't need to know any statistics or anything like this. They're very intuitive approaches as well. You just need to, click around in Excel and you're going to get some results, so to say. And then there are also more complicated, more sophisticated techniques, not really layman. You need to know a little bit of statistics in order to, get to them and get to use them. So there are definitely more techniques, especially from the complex approaches. We're not going to get into all of them because, that's meant to be a very generic talk for a very versatile audience, so to say. But we are going to definitely take a look at two types of approaches. So we're going to start out with the layman's approach. Now, Excel is an excellent tool to do that because, you can click away, so to say, and you can get to some kind of a result very, very quickly. So we're going to focus on two columns that I think are very important, and these are total annual cost and alumni salary, because essentially whenever you analyze data like this, things are going to evolve around the cost of the education and how exactly it's going to correlate with the people who get into this university, with the eliteness of rank in that university, and respectively with the salary once you've graduated that particular university. So the easiest thing you can possibly do in order to see whether you have some outliers in your data is simply to sort out the column you're interested in and look at the top, see whether there's anything that you don't really expect to be there, and also look at the bottom and look for the same thing. So we're going to do this. I'm going to do that by pressing Control, Shift, and L on my keyboard, but you can also actually use that button here as well and just turn the filter on and off. I'm just used to the keyboard shortcuts. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sort smallest to largest, and boom, immediately. Here we have 4 rows with zeros in total annual cost, have missing values and average grant aid. Missing values also, zeros in net price. And yeah, in general, also no ACT lower and upper bound. In general, these rows look kind of fishy, so to say. So I know that, that's America, it's not going to be a free university for sure. So this is definitely not the case here. There must be some kind of a data corruption going on here, and these values definitely look fishy. So I'm actually going to highlight them for the time being, and I'm going to continue looking down. So I see also 2 very unexpected values. Even the fact that they're 4 digits already makes them very suspicious. I don't know how familiar you are with the cost of US education, but I can tell you that I don't think 4 digits exists really. So we're going to highlight these 2. Now that I've got this down, I'm going to move to the very bottom of the column. I'm going to do this by pressing Control and arrow down, which is going to bring me to the very end. And there we go. Okay, I can see lots and lots and lots of values that are around 70,000, find 72,000, 74,000. And then all of a sudden, we get this 170,000, 250,000. And then this one here, this extremity right at the bottom. So to me, this already looks pretty fishy as it is. So I'm going to highlight these columns there as well, because I don't think these really converge with the rest of that column. Okay, you can see that, there is a very like gradual kind of like uprising in the increase of the total annual cost throughout this column. So the rows that we highlighted definitely go into the definition of unusual values. We're not really expecting them to be there, and they're not very similar to the rest of the values. Okay, just let me move my plan out of the way. Okay, so this was the the most simple way to find outliers that exists. I mean, that's a little bit tedious because it's very manual, because here we have, how many columns do we have? We have 17 columns, so I guess it wouldn't really take so much time to go through this filtering and sorting in your data sets. But still, this is not really, that's such an ideal way to do that. Also, that's very important, I think. If you work as an analyst, you don't really have a log to prove how you got to that conclusion that you had to remove this many rows because there were outliers. I mean, not that you always need proof for everything that you do, but especially if you work in larger institutions, I mean, like a corporation or something, or even a larger firm, pretty much anything you do in terms of your decisions regarding your data, you need to justify in some kind of a way. So you can't just really say, well, these values seemed off, because it's just, it's not very, let's say, plausible. It's not very justifiable, and it doesn't really seem very legit. So this is something that you can do in the beginning of an analysis, just to have like an initial feel of what the data is like and what the data could present. So right now, we can already see that there are some irregularities, especially in that column. Okay, so what we can do now, so that we have some kind of like a logged justification of why we think these values are outliers, is we can go to visualizations. And visualizations are extremely powerful. Okay, can see a comment from Tony Miller. Okay, fair enough. So military academies funded by US federal government don't have tuition fees because they're free in exchange for 5 years of service after graduation. Fair enough. We have, okay, Naval Academy, Military Academy, Air Force Academy, Coast Guard Academy. Cool. That's a very valid, very valid comment, and that goes a long way to just knowing your data and having some domain knowledge. But still, these definitely are very unsimilar to the other values in a data set. So we can rather say that these are exceptions from the other ones, because, we have, these are really 4 that have the zeros, that don't have any cost. And altogether, our data set consists of 650 rows. So my point is that if you want to make some kind of a summary, like a generalized insight about America's top colleges, which is sort of the point of the analysis usually, you can't really include these 4, because they're not really your everyday scenario. I mean, they're kind of their special case scenario. And, if we say college in America is generally expensive, this would be true for all the rest of these observations, except for these 4. So, they just don't really belong in the same group. And that's actually an excellent example of how outliers are defined, because just these 4 universities don't really belong in the same group. So we were talking about visualizations. Visualizations are very handy and definitely very advisable to use, because first of all, they're extremely intuitive. That's one. You can straight away see things that maybe you're not able to see inside the table of data. And also, they leave some kind of a footprint that, you did your research, and that you explore what the data looks like. And as we said already, especially when you're working with lots of people inside of the institution and everything needs to be, trackable and reproducible, it's definitely a good idea to have some kind of a visual log and visual proof that justifies your decision, for example, to remove some rows of data. So we're going to start out with univariate analysis here. And by univariate, I mean just one variable, analyses of just one variable. And very often, we can spot irregularities in univariate analysis already. Sometimes we can spot them in bivariate analyses, so analyzing two variables at the same time. So I'm going to start out with, actually going to continue with the total annual cost, because we already sort of know what's going on with this column. And we are going to create a histogram. So I've actually already done that, but I'm going to show you how I did it. So in this tab, we have a histogram. That's a histogram. So the definition of a histogram is basically, you can see that there's something like bars in there. They basically group data in some density groups, but basically it's meant to show you the distribution of a data set. And by distribution, we mean, you can see here that these are, for example, the values from 0 to 9,100. So we have this many values of them. You can see they're not really that many. The value here, when I hover my mouse over the bar, says 5. So we've got exactly 5 entries that fit into that group. So for the next one, we have 2 values. You can see that the bar is very low. For the next one, we have 7 values. Again, it's very low. And then all of a sudden, they jump up, right? So you can see we have 84 here. We have 151, 146. So basically, a histogram groups your values into plausible subsets of the data set and tries to come up with a distribution. Right here, we can see that, we would call this an extremely right-skewed distribution, because we've got the bulk of the values on the left side, and we've got, here is empty, empty, empty. And we'll call this a very, very long tail on the right. Okay? So this is an extremely right-skewed distribution, and that very often is an indication for outliers. This is actually something that we already know. We know that we have a couple of values that are below 10,000. We already saw that in the column. And we can see we go to 1, 2, and 3 extreme values towards the upper limit. We actually already saw that too, because these are essentially these 3 rows right here. So let me just show you how I created that histogram in case someone is wondering. I would just select the entire column, go to Insert, then go to this button right here and press on Insert Statistics Charts and go for histogram. So there we go. So I've beautified the one, and I put a title on the other tab just so that it's more understandable. But this is basically how you do it. Okay, so this was a histogram, and as we said already, you can see that we've got these 3 extreme values right here. And also we have these ones here that, I wouldn't really call the third group that extreme, but the first 2 are definitely on the more extreme side. There is another very handy plot that we can use in order to spot outliers. Actually, some people use it just for that. And this is the box plot. So histogram is actually fairly popular and fairly widespread. So you might have even seen one by now. Box plot is something that's, on the other hand, considered to be more a statistical visualization. So this is how it looks like. Just going to zoom out a little bit so that you can see it better. I'm also going to decrease the size a little bit. Okay. So as a start, this may seem a little counterintuitive, basically what the box plot shows you is the exact same distribution as a histogram up there, but tilted by 90 degrees. Let me just put them side by side for a second so that you get the idea. Okay, so you can see that the histogram goes like this. So we've got the peak right here. So if I were to flip this by 90 degrees to the left, it's going to look exactly like the box plot. So here you have the beginning of the values. Here you have the bulk of them. That cross right here is actually the mean of the values. And the line that goes across that is the median. And here we have, this is the third quartile. We're going to talk about quartiles a little bit later on, so stay tuned about this one. And we've got some weird dots around here and some dots around here as well. Now, if you pay close attention, you'll notice that these three dots right here are actually the exact same three extreme values that we saw in the histogram as well. So basically, the histogram is more informative in terms of seeing, you know, the bins. They're so-called, the bars are called bins inside the histogram. You can see the bins, you can see how are they really distributed in terms of shape. You can see that there are a few more values right here in this bin than on the bin on the left. But that doesn't really matter. What the box plot tells us is whenever you see a dot somewhere around here, it's because you have an outlier. And we're going to also go into how exactly the box plot calculates that, because it is going to be one of our more complicated techniques. But you can see that this is extremely handy straight away, because you can see that, okay, you've got the majority of the values on the left-hand side, and you've got a little bit of outliers here towards the 0, and you've got 3 extreme outliers on towards the upper limit. So these are between, you can actually see these on the y-axis. These are between 150,000 and, yeah, a little bit above 450,000. So that's exactly, you know, the same result that we got to from our filtering beforehand as well. So these were actually the bivariate analyses. And we can also do something a little bit more complicated in terms of visualizations. And so these are the univariate ones. Let's look at a bivariate one. So what we could do is we could explore the connection between total cost and alumni salary, because, you know, this is something that very often goes together quite much. So it's kind of like, you know, the more expensive the college is, you know, potentially, you know, the more well-off you are, and potentially the more well-off you are, you know, the better chances in life you have, and this equals to having a bigger salary. So, you know, apart from this clear inequality that's been known to the world for ages and ages, this is a correlation that unfortunately exists very often, and hence we're going to look at how exactly it looks in that data set. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more. Okay, let's see what we got here. On the x-axis, which is always going to be the horizontal axis, we've got total cost. Then on a y-axis, we've got the alumni salary. And basically, we have them plotted together against each other onto a coordinate system. So we've also got a trend line. You can see that the overall trend is upwards, which is exactly, you know, what we're going to expect. So this means basically the higher the cost, the higher the alumni salary. And you can see straight away here that there are some outliers. So these are the zeros that we already know about. Here we have the 3 extreme values, which we also already know about. But you can see that, you know, most of these are sort of clustered around the trend line, which is what we would, you know, essentially want. But then we've got some extremely high values of alumni salary, that don't really fit with the overall trend. Okay, so if we imagine, for example, that like these values here didn't exist, or the extreme ones. So if you can blend out mentally these dots right here, you can see that, first of all, the trend line is going to change, and that's extremely important. So the trend line is probably going to go like something like this from here, and then we're going to have these dots being not really convergent to the trend line. So this is the other case that we mentioned where, a value on its own wouldn't really be an outlier if you look at just this one column where it belongs. But if you look at it in a certain context, so if you look at it in the context of total cost with alumni salary, then it may actually be an outlier because it sort of goes against the overall trend. And that's important to know, especially in modeling, for sure. And that's also going to affect the mean. So this was this one, and then I have also looked at cost, and AR is acceptance rate. And here you can see again, yeah, we have these extreme values that we already know about. Basically, we can see something very similar as, let me just zoom in. We can see a very similar trend as with salary. So these are other ways from the layman's perspective to look at outliers. And now that we've done with that, because you can just really play around indefinitely with plots in Excel, and it's a lot of fun. We are going to talk about a little bit about the more complicated techniques. It's actually, I'm saying it's more complicated because it involves calculations, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Okay, so we are going to focus again on the total annual cost. Okay, and basically what we want to do with this procedure is we want to set some kind of a minimum below which we're going to consider a certain value to be an outlier, and another maximum in this case, above which that value would be considered an outlier as well. Okay, so if we go back to the histogram, basically we want to be able to put like a mark right here and maybe a mark right here, and calculate everything that's going to be below this bit or below this bit. And here is where the theory of quartiles is very handy for us. So what is a quartile? That's okay, a little bit of statistics for you, but that's very important. Quartile, basically, coming from Latin and, meaning 1/4, which is very intuitive, is basically the point that separates your data set into quarters. So the first quartile is essentially going to be the 25th percentile. The third quartile is going to be the 75th percentile. So if you can go back to the histogram, you can just imagine splitting that distribution into 4 parts. That's going to give you your quartiles. Okay, so we don't really actually need to calculate anything by hand, thank God. There is a function in Excel, which is called just quartile, very straightforward, where you choose a data range you're interested in. So this is total annual cost here. And then second argument actually even tells you quart. It asks you which quartile you're interested in. So here we're interested in the first one. Then we need to find the third one as well. So quartile 1, quartile 2. These are essentially the, let's say this again, the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile. So basically, if you look at the distribution, that's going to yield like the very middle part of the distribution of the variable. Okay, and then we need to find out what our interquartile range is. And this is basically exactly these 50%. And to find this out, we need to just simply subtract the first quartile from the third quartile. And this gives us where the 50% of the data lies in. And here actually comes the calculation. What we do here is it's a formula, it's nothing that you actually need to know by heart. The formula goes that the lower limit for outliers is going to be the first quartile minus 1.5 times the interquartile range. So that's going to give you the lower limit. And then the upper limit is respectively going to be the third quartile plus, know that it's a plus, it's not a minus, plus 1.5 times, again, the interquartile range. So to put this in a little bit more context, there is a histogram. Let's say the first quartile is somewhere around here, maybe, let's say supposedly, around this bar. So basically, we get this value here minus 1.5 times what this thing inside is. And this is going to give us some area of the distribution on the left. Then for the upper limits, the same thing is going to happen. It's going to give us some area of values on the right side. And once we know these things, so these are the lower limit and the upper limit, we can create a column where we use a formula that's a very basic Excel. Is this value this or is this value that? And essentially what we need to know here is this value from cell A2 smaller than the lower limits, or is it higher than the upper limit? So essentially this tells us, is this an outlier or not? So you can see, okay, we've got false, 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 because all of these are inside that range that we outlined through these limits. And then all of a sudden, we get that 170,985, and we get a true, okay? And why is it true? Because our upper limit is going to be 92,000, right? And that's actually, it's a very fail-safe technique because, you don't just arbitrarily come up with decisions. You don't go like, okay, this seems a little bit off, or I don't think this value belongs here. You have like a hardcore baseline calculation. Sorry, which formula is that? Irina, there is a question. Is it the one in cell B2? Okay, I'm going to wait for your reply. Upper limit and lower limit. Okay, so I just typed this up. This is something that, because this is a formula. I mean, really, if you just Google interquartile range outlier formula, this is just how it's calculated. It's kind of like it's just a mathematical formula. I mean, I know that this is not a very satisfying answer, but it's just the way the formula is. It's kind of like, what is the conversion rate of Fahrenheit to Celsius? It's exactly the same thing. So that's your explanation. There's nothing very complicated about this. You didn't miss anything. Okay, where were we? Yeah, so this is the really big benefit about this approach is that, we have it laid out right here. You've got a reason to have set the lower limit where you set it, and you've got a reason to have set the upper limit as well. And then, it's really easy to just find out how many outliers you've got. And in this case, I just create a pivot table, which is a pivot table of this column, in case you're wondering. And okay, so I just created a bar chart to see how this looks like. And we've got false and we've got true. And you can notice that the ones that are true here, exactly 7, which is pretty much the same as what we outlined here, is probably these 4 and these 3, meaning that according to the interquartile range formula, these are actually not outliers. So you can see why it actually really pays off to, to have some kind of a scientific approach about it and not just go with, well, this seems off, or pure intuition, so to say, because intuition could be wrong. Because actually here you can see this is our lower limit. So this one is actually fine. I think this one is actually also fine because it's above the limit. Yeah, it's above the limit. So you can see this was a very nice way to calculate where your outliers are and how many they are. I wanted to show you something before we jump on to some other questions. I wanted to show you something else that I personally find very, very handy in terms of knowing whether to look for outliers, because sometimes, when you have a data set with lots and lots and lots of columns, especially in Excel, it could be very hard to decide which column you want to focus on. And you can't really do this for each and every column. That only really works for just if you have like 17 columns, like in this case. So there is this trick, so to say, with descriptive statistics in Excel. And just before we start out, this is located in a data tab. There is an analysis window right here, but it could be that you don't have that unless you've installed it's a data analysis tool pack or something like this. You can install this by going to File, going to Options, going to Add-ins, and then you can see that I have Analysis Tool Pack enabled in here, but maybe you have it as inactive. So if you wanna activate it, I don't need VBA, but just to show you what I do, I would go to Go, and then click on this, press an OK, and it should appear somewhere around here. Maybe not really in that particular window, but that's how you do it with the data analysis tab right here. So that's this is where you're going to conduct some statistical tests from as well, if you're interested in that sort of thing. That's actually going to be the topic of the next talk, by the way. But just to show you what kind of information we can obtain from the function descriptive statistics, just to show you what we've got here. Got different tests. We got correlation, covariance, descriptive statistics, and lots of other fun stuff as well. So this function, descriptive statistics, is going to yield a result like this thing here. So at the first glance, that looks just like a bunch of numbers, but essentially this tells us a lot about that variable and about its distribution. So we have got the mean as a start, which is exactly the same as here in the box plot. And we can also check this out if we just simply select the entire column, and it's going to show up in the very bottom as well. So we've got the mean, got the standard error, which I actually want to say a few things about as well. Got the median, we've got the mode, standard deviation, courtesy, skewness, range, minimum, maximum, and so on. So all of these are called different descriptive statistics measures. And, apart from the things that most of you probably know about, like, for example, the mean, being the, let's say, most representative value, like the average value for the data set, there are a couple of things that can indicate outliers in the data set straight away. So we're not going to go through the entire outputs of that function, because that's probably a whole topic on its own. But I'm going to tell you what exactly tells me right here that there may be outliers. So first of all, I've got a standard error that seems like it could be smaller. So what is the standard error at all? So standard error basically tells you how much, let's say, how representative the mean is compared to all of the values in a data set, so to say. That's a rather layman's explanation, but I think it's going to do here. So I can see that it's not enormous. It could be way, way, way larger. But still, 884, that's not really small as a number. So that already gives me alarm sign number 1. Then I'm going to continue, and I can see standard deviation is going to be 22,546. Now, what is a standard deviation? Standard deviation shows you basically how far away are the values distributed around the mean in the distribution. So this is, again, a statistical term, but probably not going to go through the formula because I don't think we have time. But maybe if someone can send a link in the chat about standard deviation for the others to check out after the talk. Basically, the standard deviation shows you whenever you have the distribution, you have the mean inside the distribution. So let's imagine this is the distribution we were talking about. It tells you how far away and how many distances can you plot away from that mean. So it also tells you a lot about the distribution itself. So right here, I can see that the standard deviation is quite large. You know, having the mean being 51,000, having the standard deviation being 22,000, I know that, you know, this means that I have a very, very wide spread of the curve in order to get a result like this one. I would never expect to have, you know, this large of a deviation because, you know, essentially your distribution is going to be made out of the mean in the middle, and you would have 1, 2, 3 standard deviations away from the mean until the end of the tail, right? So that means that if the one standard deviation is 22,000, I would have to be able to fit 6 times 22,000 across that curve. And that's a lot. That is really, really a lot. So this tells me straight away that there's probably some kind of an extreme value somewhere around here. And then this, I mean, I already have the suspicion that, you know, there is an extreme value, which means that there is probably some kind of a severe right tail, right skew, or left skew. And I can actually check this straight away here in the skewness measure. And this is 9.85, or 86 if you round it up. Now, what does this tell us? If the skewness is equaling to 0, this means that we have a normal distribution. You know, a normal distribution is a symmetrical bell curve. I think we've all heard the term before. Basically, it's a very ideal distribution in this shape. You know, it's completely symmetrical from both sides. And, you know, just the fact that the skewness is this much above 0 tells me that, okay, that's definitely got some kind of a skew. And, you know, this actually is being confirmed by that chart right here. And now to see how everything is going to change once we clean the data, because I think that's the actual exciting part, is I've got in this tab, I've got the highlighted values cleaned, I deleted them, and this is how the descriptive analysis here has changed. So look at this. Okay, so the mean is smaller. That's for 1. It's gone down. The standard error is much, much smaller. So it's pretty much like halved, you know. So this tells me that the mean of 50,655 is already much more representative than it was before. When the other thing which tells me that is that the standard deviation is also much smaller. Skewness very close to 0. Okay, so now that we've actually cleaned this, let's visualize how is it going to look like. Let's go to the Clean tab, to Insert, Histogram. Boom, there we go. So I'm just going to move this to the other tab for comparison. Okay. Well, you can see the difference is huge. And while, you know, we're still not really able to call this a normal distribution, because if you follow my mouse, okay, we've got this part here, that's right, but then we've got a little bit too much maybe on the right tail, and maybe these two values would still be counted as extreme, perhaps, but you can see that that's no longer skewed like it's skewed on the left-hand side. So it already looks much more different. And you can see for yourself how much this essentially changed the descriptive statistics. So this goes kind of to answer your question, the ultimate question, why do we even need to clean outliers? Well, this is why you need to clean outliers, because if you're on the job and your task is to describe a data set and, describe it in statistical terms, this thing is very, very different from that thing right here. So ultimately, this is where you really need to pay attention for outliers. And so this was more or less about the calculations and the different techniques of detecting. And speaking about handling, just a few things, because, you can do three things. You can do nothing, you can remove the rows, and you can maybe replace them with some other value, like the mean or the median or something like this. But, that's all quite mechanical. And, in Excel, it's also pretty straightforward. You're just going to go to the data set, you're going to select the rows, you're going to delete them. Long story short, the more important question here is when exactly to do that. So when is a value really going to be considered a missing value? And, that's, an outlier, not a missing value. So that's, apart from all the calculations and, all the visualizations that you can do. It was actually a pretty good example. Thank you very much, Tony Miller, for pointing this out about the military and the Navy academies. See, it was clear that I don't know my data set. I mean, I don't know much about colleges, so I didn't know why these values were outliers. Now, Tony knew that, so he pointed this out. The thing is that not knowing your data set may cause you to make a decision that is actually wrong because you don't have an explanation for the data being the way it is. And by saying this, I want to go further and even make the point that sometimes you don't expect your data to be normal or to be behaving as let's say you would expect it to behave. And there's a very good example about this right here, and that's regarding alumni salary. Okay, so for example, with cost, we were only really happy when we got it to the point where we have some kind of like okay-ish distribution. At least, it's not right skewed, if anything else. And, we're happy with this. We're moving on with our lives. What do we do, for example, with the column alumni salary? So I made another histogram right here. And I don't even need to run any kind of a descriptive statistics test in order to see that this is very right skewed. These groups here, they're very small. It's like 11 records, 13 records, 9 records, 4 records. This bit right here represents a very small group of the entire population in this column, right? So if I, for example, go with the same approach as the interquartile range here, it's probably going to make me cut this off maybe around that value. That's about, what is this? 140,300. And we're going to lose, all of these extremely high salaries and stuff. Now the question is really, should I do that? And now I'm going to actually apply some domain knowledge, and I'm going to tell you straight away that income and salary is always right skewed. I mean, if you think about it, it's very few people that get a lot of money, but this is just how it is. So we can't just completely discard them from the population and from our reality, because, this is some kind of a fact. So that's got a lot to do with distributions, and and statistics distributions are like a whole bit of science inside itself that basically explores how different phenomena tend to diverge to certain distributions. And for example, height and weight tend to diverge to the normal distribution, but salary and income always is right skewed, like always. So in this case, even though I can see that, I can see there is some right tail around here, I'm actually even gonna go ahead. I'm gonna run a descriptive analysis on this one. Oh, descriptives. This is a column. I need column K, so you can see I'm actually filling this in. So I need the column K. I want the output range to not be here because I already have stuff here. I wanted to go to alumni salary. So I'm going to highlight these columns right here for the output like this. I've clicked on the box labels in the first row. That's important because otherwise the function is not going to know that we have headers. And I've clicked on summary statistics. So then I press OK. And here we go. OK, we have a mean of 98,000. Standard error is kind of OK. But then standard deviation, OK, but a little bit high. But mainly you can see that the skewness is 1, so this is definitely not a symmetrical distribution. And I can also see the minimum and the maximum. So you can see that, yeah, the right tail is being completely confirmed by the descriptive statistics, but I'm still not going to do anything about this column because it's just the way it is. I mean, my domain knowledge here helps me to determine that, yeah, it's just, I really ought not to touch this column. So essentially, this is more or less it regarding outliers. And if I've missed something or if you want to ask anything that's not clear, now is the time to do so, because I think we still got enough time, if I'm right. In general, until some questions come up, what I would summarize is definitely click around with some sorting if you have the time to do that, because with 17 columns, it's very easy to just click around and, sort up and down, sort ascending and descending. With more columns, it's not going to be as easy as that. So definitely do click around if you have the time. Definitely create some visualizations like scatter plots and histograms, and definitely box plots. Box plots are very important, like this one. But when it comes to some kind of a sort of like hard science way to determine, use the interquartile range, but just don't use it blindly just because, just without thinking what this column is going to mean. That's an excellent question. How do you decide which or how many columns you're going to analyze? Well, that depends on how many columns you have in the first place. But in general, I'm going to repeat myself. Here is where domain knowledge comes into play, because, you're not going to analyze, for example, the column, let's say, the column website. You're going to work with this one. You're probably not even going to analyze the column rank as much unless this is the point of your analysis. So this is very arbitrary in terms of what are your research questions? What is it exactly that you're trying to find out, Alencar? I mean, for example, right here, I'm not interested in the public-private column because I sort of laid out my hypotheses research question about the correlation and the connection between total annual cost and alumni salary. So for me, this column wasn't very interesting here. But, it may be the case that for someone else's analysis, that's the most important column. So basically, to to put this under the bottom line is you're definitely going to analyze the columns that are key for your analyses. It may not be the total annual cost in this case. You may not care about the salary. Maybe what you care about is whether public institutions have more students with higher grants. These are things that I didn't even touch base on in this particular scenario. So to sum this up, clarify your research questions. Look at the data set very closely. Clarify what are the most essential variables for your analyses. Definitely do highlight them. Then look at some other variables and mark them as unessential. And then from there, you just don't look at these ones anymore. Okay, you just look at the essential ones, and that basically outlines your analyses and where you're going to go in terms of that. So this is an excellent question. Anyone else? Yes, Andrew, I just read your comment. I think this was a lot. I'm sorry if I got you cognitive overload, but I hope it was somewhat clear.
Thank you, Dana. Yes, it was it was a lot of information, but thankfully we're recording the session, so you'll be able to get back to everything and kind of skim through it again. We had a couple of questions. And one of them I think you answered already, but I can see one here. What would you say is the best end-to-end program to learn Power BI?
Power BI. Oh, that's a good question for sure. Let me think about this one. In general, I would say that the best program is the one that's going to get you hired. But if you're already hired, then it's going to be the one that your company wants you to learn. And I think, in addition to that answer, I think that Microsoft BI was it? I think it's one of the most widely used ones. But no, sorry, Power BI, Microsoft Power BI. That's the one. I would start there, because there are also lots of courses and materials. Definitely do pick something that, or do you mean program by course? Was that the question? Sorry, can you please clarify that? Do you mean what's the best course to learn Power BI? Because I got program as software in that case, but if you meant course.
I think, maybe, what about the course? Yeah.
What about the course? Well, Jesus. Now that's a really tough one. I would say definitely do your research, because nowadays we're in the era of e-courses, and definitely do see whether there is enough support. That's for sure. And I really mean enough individualized support, and not just some random person that you message every now and then, and you get a different answer from different person every time. Definitely look into a more individualized approach. Something that you can have your own tutor or your own support for the time being. And what else? What else is important? I think whatever you choose, just make sure you're consistent and you learn it. I think this is the bottom line of everything. Because honestly, if I go onto YouTube right now and I type in Power BI, I can already see about. Okay, I can see just from the first 7 videos about 4 hours on Power BI, and then I can see a playlist with 138 videos. So if you click on this one, you're consistent enough to go through all 138. It is going to be the best program for you. I mean, I know that that's a very vague answer in one way or the other, but I also can't really say Udemy is the best or Coursera is the best or DataCamp is the best, first of all, because they're competitors. I'm joking. Not only because of that, because in order to give you an answer to this, I need to have done most of the big courses, and I haven't. So from my personal point of view, I can't really recommend anything that I haven't done myself. Go on YouTube. It's awesome. It's free.
Exactly. I can't see any other questions. So I think we're gonna close. We have another event coming up in September, on the 22nd of September, about hypothesis testing. Yeah, you'll of course will be emailed about all the details once the event goes live at one point in the next couple of weeks. So you'll be able to attend that as well. And with that, yeah, I wish you good evening, good morning, wherever you're based. Dana, thank you so much for presenting.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for everyone's attention. I know this was long-ish and lots of details, but I really hope that this was useful.
Fantastic. Thanks again, and yeah, see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice day or night.